Welcome to the Merge Club podcast. We're your hosts, Julian and Ari. Merge is a club for ambitious and creative people who've received grants to work on their projects. If that sounds interesting to you, you can check us out at merge.club. This podcast is meant to showcase mergers and the things that they're working on, and also the lessons that they've learned along the way. Let's get into it.
Today, we're welcoming merger Sohi Patel to the podcast. Sohi got her start at school science fairs, where she discovered her love for chemistry, material sciences, and engineering. She and her co-founder recently received a grant from Tyler Cowen at Emergent Ventures to build their new company, Organ, focused on recording hyper-personalized health context at the molecular level. On the show today, Sohi tells us about how she found her first mentors, her experience selling her startup to a U.S. defense company in her senior year of high school, how she thinks about non-dilutive capital, and her experience building her new startup. Enjoy the conversation. I think for starters, I want to zoom out and sort of turn it back to whatever age it was that you realized I'm interested in whatever it might be that set you on sort of the track that you are on now. So if we could sort of teleport back to that moment, what was going on in your life?
Yeah, it was one very specific moment. And first of all, thank you for having me. It was the ninth grade science fair. So up until this point, I was totally out of touch with STEM. Thought it was the most boring thing. I was really bad at times tables and whatever they made you do in elementary school. I was much more of a reader. I would devour fiction books, Goosebumps, whatever fantasy novels, and I loved to sort of escape into those worlds. And I thought science was the complete opposite of that, and I didn't really see much creativity in the field. So my whole life plan was become an author. I was writing books at the time. Again, I was in fourth, fifth grade, and I wanted nothing to do with STEM. And then in ninth grade, I had to participate in the science fair as part of the requirement for the science class I was in at my school. And I had a really great teacher. Her name's Dr. Fox. She's retired since now, but she really motivated me and inspired me to look at problems in the world and come up with ways to solve them. I had no background in chemistry or anything that I wanted to work with. So I really had to learn how to develop those tools on my own, and a lot of that was Google and ChemLibre and Khan Academy and whatever online resources there are. There's a ton on YouTube, organic chemistry tutor, whatever. So I started with chemistry, making sustainable chemicals, and I ended up doing pretty well at science fair, and that was really surprising to me. I hadn't ever really done any competition sort of stuff before. And I found a lot of support in that community with judges, with other people that were doing it, with a lot of friends I made. Continued to do science fair throughout high school, did material science, then that turned into robotics, and that ended up becoming my first company my senior year of high school. So that's kind of where the academia took a entrepreneurial spin. And I really did think that the science fair to PhD pipeline was what I wanted to do. But what I'm finding is that sort of engineering projects I was doing are a lot into any sort of academic project, at least timeline wise. You're spinning out a project within a year, less than a year, and you get that sort of intensity and that agency, that urgency that you see in startups. And yeah, I just realized that's what I want to keep doing in life. And now I found a way to do it in my adult life, which is awesome, outside of competitions. But yeah, it was really through science fair that I learned about all sorts of technical things to begin with. And I mean, I wasn't really good at school, to be honest, even in high school, because all of my attention was on science fair.
Mhm.
And that is somewhat similar to what I'm doing right now. I'm very dialed into this company I'm working on in health tech, and hopefully I can keep spending my life pursuing projects this way. Yeah.
Super cool. So it sounds interesting, sort of like this relationship with, a great teacher, the science fair at your school. Maybe you're not like the top student, but at the same time, you're like inspired by what you're finding in your school system, and you're going home and like getting on YouTube and Khan Academy and sort of like going on this alternative self-learning sort of route. I'm curious, how do you think about sort of hitting like a balance that works for you between the sort of self-learning, working on your own projects type of path and going the academia route? Because I think like software engineering is one thing, but when you're working in STEM, like there are very valid points to working in, as a part of these institutions.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I still sometimes daydream about working for maybe a DOE lab or some sort of very well-funded academic program with tons of awesome equipment. And I think maybe it's something I'd be open to later in my life or even professorship. But right now, I kind of like the scrappy, uh, rebel, rage against the machine sort of uh, deinstitutionalized approach. I think it's created a lot of great things in the past, and we see that with like Bell Labs, etc. But also, I think right now we're seeing that with a lot of cool tech. And I don't know, I guess you apply the scientific method a lot in startups, so you bring a lot of knowledge from that pipeline. So I think it's worth exploring both. But it depends on maybe the pace at which you want to have your projects go from idea to reality or to implementation. And that can change, of course, based on what the project is.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think that, this must change a lot depending on what, the specific interest is or the field that you're wanting to work in. But starting so young, in elementary school, then building your first startup, I think you mentioned in senior year of high school, how did you approach, getting support from potential mentors or teachers, going out and building out these projects? How was it doing all of that as a very young person without the sort of PhD credentials, working in, a big official labs? How do you feel
Yeah.
about using that to your advantage? Were there like drawbacks? Was that a struggle? You mentioned that you were also like supported by people. How were you received?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's hard. It's still hard, honestly. Um, the number one thing was me trying to find lab space to work on these projects in high school and being super young, also during like COVID, not being able to drive if I'm like 15 years old, and get myself to and from this place. All of these I remember sending must have been like 40, 50 emails to just colleges in my area. I'm from Houston, so I lived fairly close to Rice, even like UT. I emailed them and having a lot of failure there, just because age restrictions and whatnot. But I found that I came up with a lot of workarounds. So I would borrow equipment from the community college across my high school. And this was like a rotary evaporator, I think, if I remember correctly. And like bring it to my school's chemistry teacher's fume hood in her classroom, which was like this awesome little fume hood. And before school at like 5 a.m., every day right before winter break, I would come in and run these experiments and in return clean all the glassware for the community college's professor. So I like came up with these workarounds, I guess, that mostly worked. I also just did a lot of stuff at home that I probably shouldn't have done in retrospect, like chemically or electricity wise.
Oh God.
Um, but I think you are underestimated a lot, and it's fair because, like, of course, you're a kid and you don't have the necessary training or credentials, especially with like clean room stuff or if you want to do nanotech. It's really hard, but you do find the like two or three people that will vouch for you in any situation. And those are the people that I really feel like you have to latch onto because they are often like more experienced. They know their way around the ropes a lot more. I, for example, worked with this postdoc at Rice who ended up letting or like being my sort of mentor, sort of just like go through person for lab space, for bench space, my senior year. And we're still super close right now. He's wonderful. And so I feel like those people, once they see your vision, they see that you're like demonstrating this much traction towards a goal, they will help you with the like remaining whatever percent. But yeah, it's hard. You do have to fend for yourself like a ton, and it can be very demoralizing.
Hmm.
So, I mean, no one else is gonna believe in you but yourself. That's the worst case scenario, but you can put it that way.
Gotcha. And I think like a lot of young people, and I would imagine that maybe the sort of barrier to entry is higher in these STEM fields. A lot of young people find it hard to find like knowledgeable, credible mentors. You mentioned like this professor at Rice, and uh, how'd you go about meeting these people and getting them to trust you and want to support you through the projects that you're working on?
This is so funny because this exact person that I'm talking about, our first email chain, it was like I had cold emailed somebody else at Rice who forwarded it to this guy. And then I could see in the comments, like in the previous email he had sent before he replied to me, what they had exchanged just between each other. And it was like, see if she's not just full of nonsense, and we can go from there. And so I was going into this call like, dang, they already hate me. Um, and I was like, okay, I gotta really prove my knowledge. And yeah, so that was really funny. Lots of similar cases. I think you have to really take those like 70 rejections or 700 or whatever to get that one yes, right? And it becomes a numbers game. Like I couldn't tell you how many spreadsheets I have of just emails, and even now with like VCs, and back then with professors, it's the same deal. And even like maybe somebody doesn't see your email and you follow up 2, 3 times, I think it's perfectly valid. And that's been a big thing is emailing. I love the internet age because I don't know what I would do if I was in like the 50s. And like I don't think I would be doing what I'm doing now. But yeah, definitely using tools like email to your disposal. There's some Chrome extensions like Hunter and Apollo and whatever to like find people's emails that are helpful. Also, professors usually just have it on their website.
Hmm.
And demonstrating like you have a plan. If you have like a budget and a list of steps, like a research proposal even, like as much detail as you can give them, it gives them more to work with and they'll believe you more. And also it helps you at the end of the day because now you have a plan. So it's a win-win. But it's really about not giving up and just shooting your fishing rod into the email pool
Hmm.
over and over again and praying.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah.
And these sort of mentors, or maybe it's friends, maybe it was parents or family members. Who was it that, or maybe it was just you, sort of self-learning on the internet. But I'd be curious to hear what was the moment that took you from I'm interested in STEM, I want to build these cool projects, to I want to use this technology to make products that people want to buy from me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was always very not obvious to me why other people weren't taking them through to implementation. One example of this is like the hypothetical business competitions you'll see in high schools, where to me it just feels like a waste of time. I understand it's practice, but you might create a real business. You might fail awfully, but you'll fail fast. You'll learn a lot more from that. And so I figure same thing with science fair or similar projects where you create something because you're interested in it, but also because there's some problem out in the universe. And that's how that one teacher told us to think of projects. You go on science news, you go on any like news outlet, you figure out what's the issues going on right now, and then you kind of come up with ways to solve them. And that problem solution method is the same as in startups, and I didn't know that until recently, but it's the exact same thing. And you kind of have to engineer financial structures and engineer talent pipelines, labor pipelines into your products. That's really a fun thing for me because I'm super STEM, but I love to learn about how to how can I create a funding loop to have this product sustain itself? I think that's part of the product, right? The way you're selling it and the way you're going to market. So it's coming up with like the full implementation of the product instead of just whatever trial you want to do. And that's also a very valid project. That's more science, academia, whereas I did more engineering. But I saw a lot of very cool projects like that too, and a lot of my friends did things in that. And I guess that if that's what you're more interested in, then maybe the academia route might be better, just
Mhm.
because it's more of a trial-based situation.
Yeah.
But if you're more into engineering things and seeing if they work, the sort of iterative design process, then I'd say go the entrepreneurship route.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so, like going from, thinking like, why are our students going through these business competitions and like not actually thinking about what they could leave this competition with, to then like building an actual startup that got acquired your senior year of high school. Uh, I think I need to know the story behind that quickly before we get on to what you're up to now, because there's a lot to talk about there too.
Yeah, yeah, it was everything moved so fast, and every time I talk about it, I feel like I could have done a lot of things differently and better. But like it was my largest science fair project, my absolute baby, worked on it for over 2 years. Brief overview of the product. Basically, you can imagine a swarm of microrobots that you CAD up some 3D model on your computer, export that 3D form to the swarm, and they take that shape. Then you can disassemble it, create some other model, they take that shape. So you get infinite creation of different structures or forms from the same fixed feedstock. They don't move themselves. That's how you can get them so small. So it's not as glamorous as it sounds. They don't really like assemble themselves, but you're able to put them in a container, kind of shake them around, and lots of micro electromechanical things. And I learned a ton about circuitry, nanotech, and whatnot through doing this project.
Mm.
And I started it because I'm very into like Richard Feynman's speeches and lectures, and I latched onto this idea where you could have some omni material that you can rearrange at the subatomic level to make any material, and how useful that would be from like the 60s. So I started to build that out, and it went through so many different stages. I started it in my garage, like classic story, I feel. It worked awfully the first time. Somehow science for judges liked that better than the second time. I think because I think retrospectively they liked how scrappy I was building it. But the scrappiness didn't really help make it a very good product. So then was able to use that traction with science fair. Ended up winning first at the international fair with that project my junior year. So that was super helpful in getting me into the rice clean room, where I built out the actually operable great product that I thought was ready to actually be implemented. I had licensed a product the year before from science fair, or 2 years before at that point, my sophomore year. So I kind of understood the implementation process, but I really wanted to make my own company this time and be in control of like manufacturing pipelines and everything. So I started doing that very trial and error wise. It was the second semester of my senior year, so I was super free. College applications were over with. I wasn't really paying that much attention in school. Uh, that's not good advice, but I started working on this company a lot. Started trying to gauge who would really buy it. I thought maybe tech hobbyists would be interested in having like a bucket of stuff that they can make into whatever.
Mm.
Markets ended up being more like aerospace, defense, these very big markets I wasn't well versed in at all. And so I was learning a ton just from my customers, literally building the product for the customer at that point, which is great advice now. I didn't know that's what it was at the time. I just figured like, okay, this is what they would want. This is how much they would pay if I had like this additional feature. And so spending a ton of time at that point, uh, talked to like the first VCs that emailed me, which isn't the best advice either, but that's, I mean, I thought they were interested. So that was cool because I got a lot of advice out of them just because they saw I was young. I didn't really know what I was doing, so I guess they wanted to help. And I'm still talking to them now with my new company. But then eventually had one of the defense contractors I had a contract set up with to sell the product to once it was in manufacturing reach out for an acquisition, which was crazy to me. I at that point had decided that I wanted to go to college, but I had no idea how I was going to balance college and the company. So this was kind of like a blessing. I was also just super stressed about if I wanted to have this technology in my hands or if I wanted to have like a larger entity have it in their hands. I was like 17. Um, and yeah, it was a tough decision, but at that point, I had a million more ideas I wanted to work on. And I figured I had worked on this for long enough, and I'm gonna go to college. I'm gonna take some weird other classes that are gonna open my eyes to a whole new world of things. And that's exactly what I did. And I think I wouldn't have done anything differently now. Um, but I still really do love that project. I think there's a lot to be done in nanotech. I don't think now is really the time anymore for it with the whole AI advent. But it should be cute, it should be thought of, and especially silicon tech with AI is super important. So lots to do there.
Yeah, yeah, that is like insane to create a product like at a science fair, then continue it beyond then. At 17, get it acquired by like an aerotech defense company. I don't know, if you can share the name or whatever, just by the industry, I assume not. And then you go to Yale. And
Yes.
despite like how exciting that must have been, all of a sudden you're like right back in mode. You couldn't escape it for very long. So tell me about Oregon, what you're working on with your
Yeah,
co-founder Teo at Yale.
yeah, super excited about it. And it does seem like I went right back in, but honestly, to me, it feels like it was a lifetime in between the two, where I was just searching for my next thing. And I operate very much towards a goal. Just that's how I live my life. I need something that I wake up to in the morning. And so I was really searching for that. My parents are both doctors. They run like a little mom and pop private practice together near my high school. And one of the ways I would kind of bunk school was I would work shifts at their office, basically filling in for their front desk employee when she was out. And so I was great friends with all the patients. These are like 60-plus-year-olds. Would like check them in, check them out, take vitals, scan their stuff into the EHR, like whatever technology doctors use. And really just throughout my life had seen that. I mean, my parents are super hard workers, constantly working. I kind of get that workaholic gene, I guess. And I mean, I've always seen them doing charts and dictating and always at the hospital with them every summer when I was a kid. So I knew that this was something that I really wanted to work on optimizing, just the patient care pathway. It was something I thought a lot about over the summer too, because summer I don't have school, I'm more free to work there. And then when I got to Yale, I joined the Entrepreneurial Society, which was wonderful. I mean, all of my friends, or I should say everyone there is like one of my very close friends. And I met Teo through that. So he's the current president. I direct partnerships, but I was applying to join leadership. We had a 30-minute interview set up, and it ended up being like a 4-hour walk, I think, along the Farmington Canal Heritage Trail. And this was the first time we had met. we were just talking about everything like science fiction, time perception, memory, consciousness, and I was just in awe because he was like one of the first upperclassmen I had met too. And I was like, wow, this is what Yale kids are like. Like I'm super excited. So we became really good friends. We worked really closely on a lot of projects for the entrepreneurial ecosystem at Yale together that first semester. I started thinking about Oregon in October, and at that point, the idea was something that maintains homeostasis autonomously in your body. So something maybe implanted like a bioengineered factory that at the molecular level can sort of act like a capacitor where it stores different electrolytes, different nutrients, and then releases them when you're in a deficit, maybe captures them again when you're in a surplus, and basically tracks your body's health and then reacts automatically to it. So I thought it was a great idea. It sounds awesome, like scientifically, but first person I talked to absolutely did not want it. And so I realized, okay, adoption is going to be like a big thing here. Nobody wants to implant some robot or some chip into their body that's making health decisions. At least at this point when the tech isn't that verifiable. So then it became an implant, or not an implant, a wearable, but sort of like a Dexcom continuous glucose monitor where it has a needle still. So I was playing around with the idea of how can I get a large amount of wearable data and then still somehow dose a medication in response to whatever I'm measuring. And this again was like absolute legal suicide, a regulatory nightmare. Not really something that I saw myself wanting to be in like the 7 to 10 year timeline for. So all this to say, I was pivoting all over the place. Had this very large North Star goal of optimizing the patient care pathway. I wanted to take a patient from problem to solution ASAP. I knew that I needed to maintain that patient provider connection. I mean, my parents, I know they have patients that will come into the office just to see them, and they'll be like, like, I feel better just seeing Dr. Patel or whatever. It's super cute. But like, I know how important that is for a patient. Nobody really wants to talk to an AI agent, even for customer service nowadays. You're not going to want that for your health. And so, how can we take everything else that's preventing that connection and optimize it to the max? So, right now, what Oregon is I'd say what I've been the most excited about in my life. I'm only 18, so that's not saying much. It's a wearable, completely non-invasive wristband, so it's not hard to adopt to, that measures not only what something like your Apple Watch or your Whoop would measure at the sleep trends, fitness trends level, but also a layer under at the molecular level. So we're kind of relating causes and effects. V1, we're seeing like your caffeine intake, glucose, carbohydrate or cholesterol, triglycerides, hemoglobin, blood pressure, all sorts of different things that the tech is very new for. So these are like 2024, 2023 preprints that I think I can create really cool sensors for this summer using things like electromagnetics and spectroscopy and basically relate the molecular causes to the larger effects of your health and all of this towards preventive predictive models for each individual human that's wearing an organ wearable. And this is like the 0 to 1 with the hardware. The real 1 to 100 is within the data. And so this hardware is really enabling the largest ever human health corpus of data towards healthcare ML, towards, I guess, longevity research, drug discovery, AI pharmaceuticals, therapeutic simulation. So this whole range of things that is really coming to fruition now. I don't think I'm gonna beat Meta or Google or OpenAI in the ML race, but I do think I can build a really good wearable. And so hopefully we're able to overcome the adoption and the hard tech issues and get this tech to a lot of people, get a lot of data, and bring the solution a lot closer to the problem than it is right now. With the end goal of just creating the best healthcare we can. So
Wow.
that's what we're
Okay.
working on now.
That's a lot. That's a lot to say.
Yeah.
That's exciting. So, I mean, between like the hardware element, the data processing element on the software side, the AI element, obviously there's going to be expenditures associated with
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
How did you guys approach funding this idea from like idea to actually beginning to work on the MVP? You mentioned, ordering equipment. You're going to be going to Berlin to work on this, which is crazy. Uh, you're coming from sort of a STEM background, so the concept of grants maybe came from that area, if I had to guess. But I'm curious what
Mhm.
you guys thought about VC money, because you also mentioned speaking to VCs for the company that
Yeah.
acquired that you worked on. What led you to saying like, let's go to grant capital, let's go non-dilutive, and then take it from there?
Yeah. So I still joke that VC is a complete mystery to me. I love VC. I think we're definitely gonna go that route later this year. And I think investors can be some of your best players, honestly. Right now we're so early that like we don't even really have a product locked down. So I don't think that like having anyone else on the cap table is the right idea. But at the same time, we want to have enough money to fund ourselves to get to that point. So it was a tough decision. The way that I would fund my science fair projects was largely through awards, and that's like at each tier of science fair. So it's somewhat similar, I'd say. Um, application applications are kind of different. I'm not the best writer, honestly, even though I come from my fourth grade background of writing novels. Uh, thankfully, Teo is a wonderful communicator, and he's great at storytelling and getting grants through. We applied for and got an Emergent Ventures grant, which was super pivotal. That was our first money for Oregon. That's what's enabling us to go full time this summer. It's what's allowing me to get hardware. And like up to that point, the only hardware I had gotten was whatever I took from Yale's robotics lab. And same thing in high school, it would be whatever I took from like my school's robotics team. So, you make do, but this was super great. And then we've been applying to like some competitions. We recently won Pair VC's one of their awards in their competition, which was great because that means that we can really build out this product. So I'm super excited. We now are at the point where we have enough money to get us to like the next round of funding. So gonna see how that goes. Hopefully well. Hopefully we can really demonstrate that we A, have built something super cool, and B, built something that people want, and are already willing to pay for. But then also wanting to look into like NIH, NSF, DARPA, DoD grants. Uh, that's something that is just cued in my mind permanently, just in a little mental sticky note. But those grants can also be really great sources of money. So hopefully I can start exploring those as well.
Super cool. Super cool. So I'm going to let you go in a second, but
Yeah.
I mean, the whole podcast really has been like pretty packed with good info for people starting out. But any thoughts, any recommendations, any advice for people just starting out that might be wanting to work on stuff similar to what you're working on now?
Yeah. I mean, I have two younger brothers. They're 14, so I'm always trying to get them interested in the same stuff. The number one thing is just starting some project. Like honestly, even I've like copied someone's entire circuit before when I had no idea how circuits worked, or like someone's entire C program when I was just learning C, because you have to learn through doing something. There's no other way you're gonna continue to build. If you're just reading, you're getting momentum in just reading, and you're gonna keep reading. But if you're building things, even if you're just implementing another piece of tech to begin with, every piece of tech right now is just two existing things tied together, two plus, right? So you're learning such important core principles about anything you're interested in. For me, that's like a computer or circuitry or robotics, right? For you, that might be like biotech or the climate or anything else that's super interesting right now. Is just getting out there and starting to build stuff. Uh, you're you're gonna do great. Definitely get on the news, get on sciencenews.com, look at current events, look at what's going on in the world right now that you can help fix. And no one else is gonna fix it but you. That's always been my mindset. I think you gotta put that above anything else. And yeah,
Yeah, that's
that's
great.
my advice.
That's really great. Awesome. It was really great speaking to you, Sohi. Thank you for taking the time.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ari. All right.
All right. See you.
You have a great one.